My trade is endings, not death's endings, where a thing stops being one thing and starts being another. A shoreline is an ending. A treaty is an ending. A border is the most honest ending there is because it is the only one both sides agree to look at. I am a Chartrite. I have been one for 206 standard years, which among the Surith is neither long nor short, and I have drawn more borders than any living hand at Tessic Reach. My fingers have the flat, spatulate ends our line drawers grow into, and the pads are stained a permanent blue-black that will not wash out, and that I have never wanted to wash out. When I die, they will bury me with hands the color of deep water, and every apprentice in the guild will understand exactly what I was. Understand what a border is before I tell you about the one that never moved. A border is a lie two powers agree to tell for a while. It is drawn where the fighting stopped, not where anyone wanted it, and the moment the fighting stops the line begins to breathe. It swells outward when one side grows fat and confident. It draws inward when that same side coughs. It shivers in a bad harvest year. It bulges around a mine, a lane, a warm sun. The Ordenth Reach in my lifetime has moved 1,100 light years in one direction and 800 back, like a chest rising and falling, and I have redrawn it 40 times, and every time I redrew it I felt the guild's small satisfaction. Yes, that is how it works. That is the world behaving. We had a saying at the third table. A line that does not move is a line drawn by a liar. We said it when a survey came back too clean. We said it when some minor duchy claimed its frontier had held for a century, and we sent a ship out and found it had held because nobody had bothered to check, and the actual frontier was 40 parsecs off and full of squatters. We said it as a joke. We stopped saying it eventually. I remember the year we stopped. I will get to that. Come into the chart room first, because you cannot understand what happened to us without understanding the room it happened in. The Guild of Marches at Tessic Reach is a low stone building on a cold headland above a gray harbor, 4 centuries old, and it was built for the work rather than for anyone's pride. 6 tables, each 9 meters long, each cut from a single slab of Tessic basalt so that no seam can throw a line off true. Northern light through tall salt-scarred windows, because northern light does not change color through the day, and a chart drawn under a changing light is a chart drawn under a changing hand. The ink is made here. The vellum is made here. The stylus tips are ground here, on a wheel that has been turned by apprentices since before my grandmother's shell hardened. And along the west wall, floor to ceiling, the drawers, 10,000 of them, every chart the guild has ever certified, every survey, every field book, every correction. A drawer for the Ordenth Reach and its 40 breaths. A drawer for the Sunat Lanes. A drawer for the whole cold dead sprawl of the Neth Cluster, where nothing lives and everything is nonetheless measured, because a Chartrite does not measure what is important, he measures what is there. And the difference between those two words is the entire moral content of my profession. And there is a drawer, 3rd row from the bottom, 2nd from the end, with a lead seal on it. It has been sealed for 904 years. There is a name scratched into the lead with a stylus tip, and the name is Odin Sura. He was the man who drew the line. I need to be careful here, because the story of Odin Sura has been told badly for 9 centuries, and the bad tellings all make him a prophet. They have him staggering back to Tessic Reach with his eyes burned white, raving. They have him drawing the border in one unbroken stroke and dying with the stylus in his hand. It makes a good hall song, and it is entirely false. And I know it is false because I have read the guild's ledger of that year. And the ledger says what ledgers always say, which is the truth in the most boring possible words. Chartrite Osura returned from survey of the Kellam Verge 6 days late in good health, submitted expenses, submitted 1 chart, requested that his field book be sealed, request granted by the table. Sura continued in service 31 years, drew 409 certified charts, took 2 apprentices, died of a long illness in his own bed. That is what the ledger says. He came back on time enough to file expenses. He did not rave. He worked for 31 more years, and by all accounts he worked well, and he was, the marginal notes suggest, a slightly tedious man who was particular about his ink. Only two things about Odin Sura were ever strange, and they are the two things that have kept a lead seal on a drawer for 9 centuries. The first is the chart he brought back. It is a simple thing. It shows the catalogued, a wedge of unremarkable space with a middling yellow star and 3 others, the sort of region a guild surveys every few centuries out of habit, and it shows, running across the near edge of that wedge, a line, not a border in the guild sense. He did not draw it as a treaty line with the double hatch that means agreed, nor as a claim line with the open ticks that mean asserted, unconfirmed. He drew it with a single unbroken stroke, no hatching at all, which in guild convention means a physical feature, a coastline, a cliff, the edge of a thing that exists whether or not anyone agrees to it. And on the far side of that stroke he wrote nothing, no name, no designation, not blank in the way that unsurveyed space is blank, with the light hatching that means not yet visited, blank in the way that the inside of a wall is blank on a floor plan, not measured because not measurable, not ours to measure. The second strange thing is the note he left, which is the only part of his field book that was ever copied out before the seal went on. 4 lines, in a hand the guild's authenticators have confirmed 6 separate times. I have looked at the original through glass. The ink is the same ink we still make. The stroke pressure is even. It is not the hand of a frightened man. They came out to meet me at the edge, and they were courteous. They gave me my bearings and corrected 2 of my instruments which were in error, and they were right about both. They asked me what I was doing, and I told them I was drawing a chart. They asked to see it. I showed them. They looked at it a long time, and then one of them took a stylus and drew the near edge for me and gave it back and said, "This is where we are." They did not say it as a warning. They said it the way a man tells you where his fence is because you have asked and he does not mind you knowing. I have made my living finding out where powers end. I have never once been told. I have always had to go and see. I would give a great deal to have been lied to. That is all. That is the whole of what Odin Sura said about it. And a great many people over 900 years have tried to squeeze something more out of those 4 lines and have failed, and I include myself. The line has not moved. Understand what I am telling you. In 904 years, the Ordanth Reach has moved 1100 light-years out and 800 back and out again. The Sunat confederacies have collapsed twice and reconstituted 3 times, and their frontier is currently a nonsense of exclaves that takes 4 apprentices a full season to certify. The Concord's own outer march has crept forward by 140 parsecs in my lifetime alone, quietly, in the way a big animal shifts in its sleep, and I have redrawn it and been thanked for redrawing it. There are 206 sovereign powers on my charts, and every single one of them breathes. The human line has not moved, not out, not in. Not, and this is the part that I did not understand for the first 100 years of my professional life, not by so much as the width of the stroke that draws it. We check, of course we check. It is the guild's oldest standing survey, and the assignment rotates, and it is considered a dull posting given to competent journeymen who need a season of nothing. You take a ship to the near edge of the Kellam Verge, you sit at a station Odin Sura established, and you measure. There are markers out there. The humans put them there long ago, and they are not warships, and they are not weapons, and they are not, so far as anyone has ever determined, even watched. They are buoys. Gray, unremarkable, about the size of a fishing skiff, spaced at intervals that our people worked out to be exactly equal to within the tolerance of our instruments. And then, later, when our instruments improved, exactly equal to within the tolerance of those. On each buoy, there is a single line of text in the human trade script. And the guild's translators have argued about the register of it for centuries, whether it is formal or plain, whether it is a warning or a fact. The literal sense is not in dispute. It says, "You are at our line." Not "you have reached," Not do not cross, not turn back. You are at it. The way a man would tell you where his fence is because you have asked and he does not mind you knowing. I did that survey myself once in my 61st year, and I want to tell you what it was actually like because the Hall songs get this wrong too. There was nothing to see. That is the whole of it. A middling yellow star at some distance, 3 others further out. A cold, clean void. Our instruments hummed. My journeyman, who was bored, played a game with tally stones against himself and lost. I sat at the aperture for 11 days, and I looked at a gray buoy through a glass, and the buoy did nothing at all. And behind it the Kellam verge lay open and unlit and unremarkable, and no ship came, and no signal was sent, and nothing regarded us in any way that any instrument on our hull could detect. On the 12th day I took my measurement, and the line was where Odin Sura had drawn it, to the limit of what I could resolve. And I was afraid. Not on the 12th day. On the 9th, when I first understood that we could simply go in. There was nothing stopping us. The buoys were not a wall. They were a sentence. And I sat at that aperture in the humming dark with my blue-black hands folded, and I thought, whoever put these here believed that a sentence would be enough. That is the thing. That is the thing I want you to hold. Everyone talks about what happens to those who cross. Nobody talks about the arrogance. No. That is the wrong word, and I refuse the wrong word. Nobody talks about the confidence of a species that marks its border with a statement of fact and then walks away and does something else for 900 years. We drew a great many conclusions from that, over the centuries, and every one of them was wrong. The early conclusion was that they were dead, that there had been humans once, that they had put out their markers and then died of something, and that the verge was a mausoleum with a very tidy porch. This was a popular view for about 200 years, and it produced 3 separate expeditions, none of which crossed the line, all of which came back and reported, with the particular embarrassment of men who have gone to prove something and proved nothing, that the buoys were maintained, not repaired, maintained. The dust that accretes on a hull in 900 years of void was not on them. The second conclusion, which held for another 3 centuries and which I was taught as a boy, was that they were weak, that the line was a bluff and had always been a bluff, and that the reason the humans never expanded was that they could not, that they had shot their bolt in some ancient war and drawn a fence around what was left and had been sitting behind it praying nobody would test it. There is a whole school of Concord scholarship on this. It has footnotes. It has a name, the exhaustion thesis, and men made careers on it, and I will say in its defense that it explained every observable fact. Because here is the observable fact that the exhaustion thesis was built to explain, and it is the fact that terrifies me now more than any Hall song about burned-out eyes. They never took anything. In 904 years, the Ordenth Reach has warred with the Sunnet Confederacy 6 times and taken territory in 4 of those wars. The Concord itself, which is my polity and which I serve and which I love in the tired way a man loves an institution, has absorbed 19 minor powers in my lifetime and called all 19 of them accessions. Every species that has ever had the strength to take has taken. This is not a moral observation. It is a cartographic one. It is the reason my profession exists. If borders did not move, you would need 1 chartrite per century, not 1 per table. There was a period 400 years ago when the Kessel Combine, then a young and hungry thing, fought a ruinous succession war directly against the human line's flank. Fleets burned. Whole systems changed hands 3 times in a decade. A power vacuum opened along 200 parsecs of frontier, undefended, unclaimed, rich, and open, sitting there for 11 years like a door left ajar. The humans took none of it. They did not advance 1 meter. When the war ended and the Combine's exhausted survivors crawled back to re-establish their marches, they found the human buoys exactly where they had been, and this is in the Combine's own record, and it is the only part of the Combine's record I have ever found moving. The buoys had been cleaned. Do you understand what that meant to us? To me, at the 3rd table at 40, with my hands going blue. It meant they were not exhausted. It meant they were not dead. It meant the thing standing behind that fence had been offered, for 11 years, an open door into a house full of wounded, and had looked at it, and had gone back inside, and had dusted its own fence. The exhaustion thesis is still taught. Men who are cleverer than I am still defend it. I stopped believing it on the day I read that line about the cleaning, and what I believed instead I did not say out loud for 60 years, because it is not the sort of thing a Chartrite says. A Chartrite measures what is there. What I believed was this: they are not staying behind that line because they cannot cross it. They are staying behind it because they decided to, and they have not changed their minds in 900 years, and there is nothing in the whole recorded history of thinking things that is as frightening as that. Now I will tell you about the Combine, and about the year we stopped saying our joke, and I will tell it the way the chart room received it, which is the only way I can tell it, because I was not there and neither was anyone I have ever met. The Kessel Combine in the 9th century after Odin Sura was not the young, hungry thing it had been. It was old and rich, and it had a great deal of internal difficulty, which is a polite way of saying that its directorate needed a war the way a sick man needs a fever, to burn something off. They had run out of neighbors worth taking. They had a doctrine. I have read the doctrine. It was published. They were proud of it, which held that the Concord's outer march was soft, and that the human question was a superstition maintained by cartographers. They said that last part in those words, maintained by cartographers. It was the only time in my life the guild has been named in a foreign war doctrine, and there was a small, ugly pride in the chart room about it that I did not share and do not now. They went in on the 4th day of the cold season. I remember the date because I was at the 3rd table finishing a shoal survey of our own harbor, a nothing job, the sort of thing a master does to keep his hand true, and Taro Vell, my second apprentice, then 19, with the stylish grip of a boy who has been told too often that he is gifted, came in from the receiving hall with the first relay, and stood there not knowing whether to be excited. 411 hulls. That is the number, and it is not disputed because the Combine broadcast it. They wanted an audience. 3 heavy squadrons, a survey element, 2 hospital ships, and the directorate's own flag, and a rolling signal on an open band that every listening post in 6 polities picked up clean. They crossed the line at a marker the guild has catalogued as buoy 44, which sits about 11 light towers from the middling yellow star, and I have that buoy's coordinates memorized the way a priest memorizes a psalm, and I have never been able to say why. The crossing is on record. They announced it. They announced it as though a border were a thing you could break the way you break a treaty, with a declaration, with someone standing up in a chamber somewhere and reading out a grievance. And then there is the part of the record that everyone knows and nobody can use. Nothing happened. I mean this exactly. I mean that for 9 days the Kessel Combine signal came out of the Kellam Verge on that open band, and it reported nothing. It reported clear space and good running. It reported the middling yellow star at a decreasing bearing. It reported that the survey element had found no fortifications, no minefields, no pickets, no interdiction of any kind, and that the directorate's flag officer, his name was Asen Farid Kessel, and I wanted in this record because he was not a fool. He was a competent man serving a stupid doctrine. That flag officer Kessel had ordered his squadrons to reduce readiness, because holding 411 hulls at battle stations for 9 days does more damage to a fleet than most enemies. On the 6th day, he said something on that open band that has been carved into the wall of a Combine memorial and that I think about more or less constantly. He said, "There is nothing here. We have crossed a line that was drawn around nothing, and I am beginning to think the humans did not draw it to keep us out." He was right. That is the horror of it. He was right, and he did not have the second half of the sentence. On the 10th day the signal stopped. Not degraded, not jammed, The listening posts are very clear on this, and jamming is a thing we know how to recognize, and there was none. It stopped between one packet and the next, in the middle of a routine bearing report, and the words on either side of the stop are ordinary. And then there was quiet, and in that quiet the whole of known space did the thing that thinking creatures do, which is to fill the silence with pictures. They imagined a battle. Every polity in 6 sectors imagined a battle. The Concord staff colleges ran the engagement. They still run it. They run it every year with the cadets. They call it the Kellum problem, and they cannot make it work. 411 hulls do not die silently. A fleet destroyed in action screams. It screams on every band as its ships die. It screams in wreckage. It screams in the drift field of 1,000 years of debris that a Chartrite's instruments could find blindfolded. The Guild sent the survey. Of course we did. It was our standing assignment, and the Concord ordered it, and the ship was a Chartrite's ship, unarmed, with a single blue black-handed journeyman aboard and a hull full of instruments. Her name was Siph Annan, and she is dead now, of ordinary age, and she was, I want to say, an unremarkable measurer, a solid one, the kind you send when you need a number rather than a story. She came back with a number. She sat in this chart room at this table and gave her report to the table in the flat voice of a woman reciting a survey, and I was there, and I was 91, and I have never in my life been so cold in a warm room. There was no wreckage, not a hull, not a plate, not a scrap of ceramic, not a frozen body, not a single one of the 10,000 small particles that a battle strews across a light year, and that no one can ever entirely sweep up. She ran the drift fields for 30 days. The Kellum Verge's background debris was consistent with a region that had not been disturbed in 10,000 years. There was no wreckage, and there was no signal, and there was no interdiction, and there was no sign that anything had ever been done in that place at all. And at buoy 44, where 411 hulls had crossed a line announcing themselves to a species they had decided was a superstition, Siph Annan found the buoy. Gray, unremarkable, about the size of a fishing skiff, in its catalogued position to the limit of her instruments, which by then were very good instruments indeed. Clean. She sat at this table and she said in that flat surveyor's voice, there was dust on the 2 markers to either side. Consistent accretion. Buoy 44 had none. Then she said nothing more, because she was a good journeyman and she had reported what was there. What happened next in the wider galaxy is not my subject. The Combine's directorate fell. Their memorial went up. Their doctrine was withdrawn, and the men who wrote it were quietly ruined, and the Concord made speeches, and the small powers made speeches, and everyone waited. That is the part I want. Everyone waited. For 11 years the whole of the Concord's outer march waited for the counterstroke. This was not paranoia, this was arithmetic, and it was my arithmetic because I was the one who drew the maps for it. A power that can erase 411 hulls without leaving a signature does not then sit still. It comes out. That is what powers do. That is what the entire content of my 10,000 drawers says that powers do. The Concord fortified. We drew the fallback lines. We drew the second fallback lines. I sat at this table for 11 years and drew, in the double hatch that means agreed, and the open ticks that mean asserted, unconfirmed, the shapes of a war that everyone knew was coming and nobody, in the end, could get to arrive. They did not come out. They did not take the Combine's space, which lay open and headless and undefended for 6 years. They did not take the 3 minor duchies along the Verge's shoulder, which sent embassies begging for protection from everyone, including, in one shameful and much suppressed instance, from the humans themselves. That embassy was received. This is documented. It went to the line, and it was met at the line courteously, and the human who met it, I have the transcript. The Guild keeps everything. Listened to the duchy's plea for annexation and protection, and said that they were sorry, that this was not something they did, and offered them water and instrument corrections for the journey home. Instrument corrections for the journey home. They did not expand. They did not raid. They did not demand reparation from the Combine's successor states, and they did not demand apology, and they did not. This is the one that broke the last of the exhaustion thesis in me. This is the one. They did not so much as move buoy 44 1 meter forward to punctuate the point. A meter. A single meter would have been a sentence in a language every species in this galaxy speaks fluently. It would have said, "We have taken something from you and we will take more." We would have understood a meter. We would have slept better for 900 years if they had taken a meter. They cleaned it and put it back exactly where it was. I was 102 years old, and I sat in this chart room in the northern light, and I finally said out loud the thing I had believed since I was 40, and I said it to Tarovel, who was by then 30 and no longer gifted, which is the best thing that can happen to an apprentice. I said, every empire on my charts breathes. In, out. It is the only thing they all do. A thing that does not breathe is not restraining itself, boy. A thing that does not breathe has decided something about itself once, a long time ago, and has held to it while the rest of us have not held to anything. And Tarovel, who had a stylus in his hand and had been drawing the Verge's shoulder all morning, said the thing that his generation says and mine did not. And he said it without any drama at all, the way you would ask about the weather. He said, "Master, what do you think they could have taken?" And I looked at my 10,000 drawers, and I did not answer him, because a chartrite measures what is there. The order came from the Concord in my 190th year. It was not dramatic. Concord orders never are. It arrived as a table instruction, 4 paragraphs, countersigned by a deputy marshal of charts whom I have never met and never will, and it instructed the Guild of Marches at Tessic Reach to strike the Kellam Verge from the standing atlas. Not to mark it forbidden. We have a symbol for forbidden, a doubled circle, used for radiation zones, for plague worlds, for the 4 systems in the Neth cluster where the old wars left things that still work. Forbidden is a fact about a place, and a chartrite may draw a fact. The order said strike. It said the Verge was to be removed, its designation retired, its catalog numbers voided and never reissued, and the near edge redrawn as the outer limit of Concord survey. Nothing beyond. Not blank because unvisited, with the light hatching that means not yet. Blank the way the inside of a wall is blank on a floor plan. They were ordering us to draw Odin Sura's chart again. 904 years later, the entire Concord, with its staff colleges and its deputy marshals and its exhaustion thesis, had arrived at the conclusion. A slightly tedious man who was particular about his ink had reached in one afternoon at the edge of a middling yellow star, and had written down in 4 lines that nobody understood, and had sealed in a drawer because he was too honest to explain what he had not measured. I sat with that order for a full day. Then I went to the west wall, 3rd row from the bottom, 2nd from the end, and I looked at the lead seal with his name scratched in it, and I did not break it. I want that on the record. It was within my authority. I am the chartrite of the 3rd table, and there is no seal in this building I cannot lift. I did not lift it because I had finally understood what he had done. He had not sealed a secret. There was no secret. He had gone out to find where a power ended, and for the first and only time in the history of my profession, a power had simply told him courteously and corrected his instruments and let him go. And he had come home and filed his expenses and drawn the truest chart of his life. And then he had put the field book in a drawer, because everything else in it was a man's feelings, and feelings are not what is there. 31 more years, 409 certified charts, 2 apprentices, died in his own bed. I have never respected anyone more. The correction arrived 4 months later, and it arrived by the most ordinary route imaginable, which is the last cruelty of the whole thing. It came in the Guild's regular packet from the outer survey stations, in a standard case, with standard seals, filed by a station clerk who had accepted it from a courier at the line and had not thought it strange enough to flag, because the courier had been courteous, and had had the correct forms, and had known the clerk's name. It was a chart. It was drawn on Concord vellum, in Concord ink, to the Guild of March's own certification standard, in a hand so exactly disciplined that two of my journeymen thought at first it was a Guild original that had been mis-filed. The register marks were correct. The scale bars were correct. The double hatch was used only where a treaty existed, and the open ticks only where a claim was asserted unconfirmed. And the conventions were observed so precisely, so respectfully, that I stood at this table for a long time with my blue-black hands flat on the basalt, and could not make myself understand what I was looking at. It was a chart of conquered space, all of it, not the verge, not the line, ours. 206 sovereign powers. Every march, every exclave, every one of the sonnet's ridiculous nonsense frontiers rendered with a patience I would not have spent on them myself. Every lane, every drift field. The Neth cluster in full, its 4 dead systems circled in the doubled circle that means forbidden, drawn with a compass and not freehand, the way we teach it. And through the whole of it, in a red-brown ink that is not one of ours, running like veins, corrections. Not many. That is what I need you to understand. Not a chart torn apart and rebuilt to shame us. Corrections. 4,011 of them, and I have counted, and the number's resemblance to the other number is a coincidence that I have checked and rechecked, and that means nothing and that I will never stop hearing. A lane at the Ordenth shoulder, off by 9 minutes of arc. The Sonnet exclave at Kel Bite, its northern extent overstated by 600 kilometers, an old flattery to an old ally, and we knew it, and we had let it stand for 2 centuries. A drift field in the Neth cluster that had migrated, and that we had not resurveyed because nothing lives there and nobody goes. Every correction was right. We checked them. It took the guild 2 years, and it took every table, and it broke 3 apprentices out of the profession entirely, and every single correction, all 4,011, was right. They had surveyed us. Not once. The corrections were of different vintages, some fresh, some centuries old and superseded by our own later work, retained and marked as superseded, agreed. They had been measuring conquered space, all of it, continuously, for longer than my guild has stood on this headland. And they had been doing it with better instruments than ours, and with a discipline I recognized in my hands and my teeth as the discipline of my own trade. And in all that time they had never used it, and they had never mentioned it, and they had never come. There was no message with the chart, no note, no demand, no signature, nothing to answer. And in the lower corner on the coastal detail of Tessic Reach itself, which is not a strategic feature, which is not anything, which is a gray harbor beneath a cold headland, there was a correction to the shoal. The shoal outside that window. The one I had been surveying at this table on the 4th day of the cold season 100 years ago, when a 19-year-old boy came in from the receiving hall with a relay in his hand and did not know whether to be excited. Our depth was wrong by 41 meters. Theirs was right. I took a boat out myself the next morning, an old man with an old man's instruments and a stylus in his coat, and I dropped a line into the gray water outside my own guild's window, and I stood there in the wind, and it was right. They had been in my harbor. They had been in my harbor, and they had measured it, and they had gone away, and for 900 years they had said nothing about it at all, and the only reason I know is that when we finally stopped pretending we could chart their edge, they sent us back our own coast, drawn better than we had ever drawn it, as a courtesy. The way a man corrects your instruments because you have asked him for your bearings, and he does not mind you knowing. The way a man tells you where his fence is. I have redrawn the standing atlas. It took my table 11 months, and it is finished, and it is the last major work I will do, and it is the best work of my life, which is a thing I say without any pleasure at all. The Kellam verge is gone. Its designation is retired. Its catalog numbers are voided and will not be reissued while stone stands on this headland. The middling yellow star has no number now, and the three others have no numbers, and there is nothing on the far side of the near edge, and it is not the blank of not yet visited. There is no hatching. There is nothing to visit. It is the inside of a wall. And along the near edge I have drawn the line. I drew it in one unbroken stroke, no hatching, the convention for a physical feature, a coastline, a cliff, the edge of a thing that exists whether or not anyone agrees to it. I did not use the double hatch because there is no treaty. I did not use the open ticks because nothing has been asserted. Nothing has ever been asserted. That is the entire content of the last 900 years, and it took my profession all of them to read it. I took the position from their chart, not from ours. Ours was in error by a little under 200 meters, an error 9 centuries old, inherited from Odin Sura's instruments, which they had corrected for him at the edge and which he, in the only vanity I have ever found in the man, had not fully believed. So the line on the Concord standing atlas is now drawn precisely, to the limit of measurement, where the humans say it is, copied from their hand into mine, 200 meters off from where my own guild swore it was for 900 years, and every meter of that correction moves the line toward us. They gave us back 200 meters. I have not drawn it one hand's width wider. I will not. Tarovel, who is 111 now and who has the stylish grip of a man who has stopped being gifted, will sit at this table when I am buried with my blue-black hands, and he will not draw it wider either, and neither will the apprentice he takes, nor hers. We say a great many things in this galaxy about the humans, that they are terrible, that they are hidden, that something walks in there. The small powers say it, and the staff colleges say it, and the hall songs say it, and all of it is comfort, all of it, every word, because a monster is a thing you can be afraid of, and being afraid of a monster is an ordinary way to live. I have measured them for 206 years, and I will tell you what is there. They took nothing. They were owed everything, and they took nothing. They stood on their fence and told the truth to a tedious man with bad instruments, and cleaned the marker where 411 ships announced themselves and were not answered, and mapped my harbor to the meter and never once mentioned it. And when we at last admitted we could not hold the edge of them in our minds, they sent us our own coastline, drawn better, without a word. There is nothing on the far side of my line, and there never will be. And the reason is not that we are afraid of what they will do to us. It is that they have never once wanted anything we have. And every other power on my chart is breathing in and out forever, wanting, and they are not. And I do not know what a thing that does not want is, and I do not want to know, and I have drawn its edge exactly where it told me its edge was, and that is my whole trade, and it is finished. The seal on the drawer stays.